sauce is the key, we whipping it up. The sauce is the key, we cooking it up. The sauce is the key, we cooking it up. Hey, hey, hey.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to another edition of The Sauce. I'm Derrick Mains. This is Andrew Kolikoff. You probably know both of us. If you are watching this, you found us through the network that we both have created. Andrew, yours is getting bigger and bigger by the day. I don't know how many people you have in that thing now.
I'd like to tell you that I do, because even though I'm pretty anal about keeping track, I mean, once a month, I'll be at a restaurant, I'll be somewhere, and somebody will come up to me and hug me and say, dude, how are you? How's everything? Yeah. And then I'm like,
who the heck is this?
And I act like I know them. And that, and that's when you get to a certain point where you're, wow, now I know what's like maybe like a mayor of a city feels like.
Yeah, right. You're the unofficial mayor.
People hugging you and you're like, I don't even know this person, but I mean, I'm supposed to know this person.
Well, and I think that's just, but listen, that goes to this whole, I'm actually working on an experiment right now. It's funny that you mentioned this because I'm working on this. Are you familiar with the Dunbar number?
Yeah.
The concept of the Dunbar. Right? Yeah. We've talked about the Dunbar number. I'm actually doing a whole experiment on it. My plan is later this year to have like a TED Talk ready to go out. But I actually got a research scientist that's helping me on the project now to try to figure out how people move in and out of networks. And, at what point are they sort of beyond no return? And is there anything cyclical? I mean, is there a lunar phase, that people come into your life at certain times of the year more often? And I just think it's really interesting to understand not just how to create a network, but how to groom a network so that it brings benefit to you both socially and financially. And that could be, people say this all the time. Well, I never hear from anybody till it's renewal, when it comes to like software sales. Well, that makes sense. I mean, you don't. I mean, you got to be that top of the mind, and you need to know when to bring somebody into top of the mind.
Well, that's like I mentioned when we talked about it. It's very Gladwellian.
Yeah, it is.
Malcolm Gladwell with his, he might be the preeminent, thought leader in figuring out trends. Absolutely. Or perceptions of trends.
Yeah. That's right? A great thing. Todd Rose has written a book called The End of Average. If you haven't read it yet, it's really fascinating because it talks about how systems, when you average them out, and I do a lot of averaging in the process work that we do, but he found that if you surveyed all of the pilots in the 1950s, let's say in the Air Force, and you came up with what the average pilot was, you'd very quickly realize that no one is the average. Right? If you have two, if one is a 10 and one is a 1, the average is 5. Well, that means nobody's even close to what the average actually is. So you have to be really careful with that too, right? Statistics can be very, very beneficial, but you also have to have the dimensions of it. You can't just have a singular number. I think we talk about this a lot with education. You get an A, B, C, D, E, or F. Does that really dictate you got a C in geography? Does that really mean that you're bad at geography? Or does it just mean that you can't, maybe you're an A at something else and a B at this and a C at this and an F at that? There's lots of things in school I was terrible at. Most of them now are the things that I embrace the most. I was not good at math. Now I read books like Math Numbers. This is like quantum mathematics books.
Well, math, I think I've heard the phrase that math is truth, right? Yeah. Because you can't refute 100% equaling 100%. If you take 100% and put an equal sign between it, it's irrefutable. But the one thing I know is that math can be used and to express things that don't actually portray true reality. Yes. And secondarily, math is only an approximation of the human experience. It cannot explain the human experience, which we had that talk about customer experience offline. So that's really, really interesting because when I hear that people say math is truth, well, it is, but you got to kind of put an asterisk because it may not explain the truth or reality in the way that things really are.
I think math helps us make sense of the world, but that doesn't mean that all of the answers are included in that, right? It just sort of gives us a general way of looking at things. And I think it gives us a standard and a standard deviation that we can work off of, but it can get really complex, right? People are not a one-dimensional being. Some of the I've been reading a lot of Todd Rose lately, and I'm literally like a super fan of Todd Rose. Todd Rose is a fascinating guy because this is a guy who dropped out of high school. I think he had like a 1.7 GPA. He's now one of the top scientists in the world. He worked in fast food till he was almost 30 years old, couldn't keep down a job, couldn't get into school, couldn't do all of these things. Turns out the guy's an absolute one of the smartest people on the planet in my mind. But the system that requires averages and grades and scores and all of these kind of things, it just didn't work for him. It just absolutely didn't work. He wrote a book called Dark Horse that talks about right now one of the top scientists in the world in the discovery of other planets in other solar systems is a cafe waitress from Australia who did not go to high school. I mean, there is nothing on her resume that would make you believe that she would be an expert at this, except for one night after work, she's laying on the hood of her car, looking up into the sky. And she just got this idea. There's got to be other planets out there. I wonder how you'd find them. She built her own equipment. She went through this whole entire process. And now she's like the top researcher in the world.
That's what makes me, I gave a keynote talk last week. And one of the things I always say is that I think most organizations believe that they're supposed to come up with the strategy and all the answers internally. And I always say, no, usually the greatest insights come outside of your organization from people that you would least expect. So, I mean, that is so true. Yeah. And it applies to business. One of the things I say, because, I'm in customer experience, human experience, is that one of the tips that you should always do regularly every month is ask your customers, how are we doing? How, and then on top of that, how do you think we could be better? Because now you're soliciting their ideas. And if everybody organizationally gets that feedback, you're going to get so many great ideas that you never thought of. So a woman laying on her car looking at the sky makes total sense to me, even though it just...
Let me tell you, it's funny. I want to give you this other little example. I always keep sort of like a notebook of all the ideas and thoughts that I'm working through. And one of these is a comment that was made to me, and I don't want to disclose who he is. He's a top scientist in the world, and I've known him for decades and decades and decades. And we were talking about in his field, they've been trying to solve certain problems have been 20, 30 years. These mathematical equations have been sort of pushed to the side. These ideas have been pushed to the side because nobody's been able to solve them. And he said that they recently discovered that by bringing other people from all different walks of life together into a room and giving them the problem and just observing them trying to solve the problem many times breaks these scientists out of it because they're thinking, wait a second, why did we never think of that, right? But he's like, we hear stories from people about their dog run. We hear stories about their daughter's ice dancing lessons, their soccer. And when the people tell the story and ask if that applies to what we're talking about, we're sitting on the other side of the glass going, oh my God, like these are major discoveries. Did
you ever think about it? How few Einsteins there really are that change the perception of how we view ourselves in our lives. I really believe that 99.99999% of the time, perception is changed outside of ourselves, not inside of ourselves.
Well, my friend has a quote, and he says, people who think like us have to be smarter than us to solve our problems. So think about that. If I have a problem in mathematics and I just recruit other mathematicians, they have to be smarter than me. I have to admit that I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Well, let me tell you, in his practice, he is the smartest guy in the room. Everybody knows he's the smartest guy in the room. So for him to bring somebody else in, and they're not going to come up with a solution. They probably haven't thought through it in any of the ways that they've been trained to think as a scientist. They probably haven't thought through it any way differently or can't. But when you bring somebody that's a complete different practice into the room, all of a sudden, our problems to them, they don't have to be smarter than us. They just have to know something that we don't know. And I think that's what's so important. And that's what we want to talk about today. I want to transition that into this, but please go ahead.
No. I mean, it's just, I'm like you. I mean, I'm a former chief science.
You are a former scientist,
university adjunct professor. I think, what made Einstein was how actually creative he was, not just scientific. I mean, he came up with, a lot through thinking of creative scenarios about a person in an elevator. And if the elevator just dropped, and then what would happen to that person, so he would come up with these creative scenarios in his mind to come up with the math. So that creativity is essential to scientific breakthrough. But go ahead.
Yeah. So I'm going to transition here because I actually feel like we just hit the nail on the head. We're going to talk about a math equation today. So let me share my screen. So let's talk about the ultimate math equation in business. And that's 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. And what does that equal? And that really equals success. And I'm going to show you how it equals success and why this conversation that we just had is really, really important for you as a business owner, particularly as we're going into a potential state of recession, on how you need to focus on aspects of this equation. So whatever this just calculates up to a profitable organization. 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. So what is each one of these? Well, the first one is inputs. This is Andrew, how many executives do you talk to that are able to tell you their cost of acquisition? They know a lot of information about what it takes to build the product. They know their costs. They know where they acquire those things. They know where they get customers. They know what the cost of referral is. They're really good at the inputs of the business. They have very good tracking. They got a CRM. They have salespeople. They have people that are sourcing things. They know the inputs of their business. So they have number one. This is one we're going to skip over for a moment because I'm going to tell you that this next one, throughput, is something very few people have a handle on. The other one that they probably have a really good idea of is the outputs of the business. So I know my financials, right? I know how much money I make. I know my profit per product. I know my cost of labor, my cost of goods, all of these
margins.
My margins. I know all of those kind of things. So most business owners are really good at this. They know how to get customers, how to build their, how to obtain the materials to make their products. They also know their bottom line, particularly if they're like an EOS company, right? They're really, really good at focusing in on their bottom line. They know what kind of margins they're making. They know the trend lines, all those kind of things. This is Andrew's favorite one next, and then I'll go back to my favorite. So the last one, though, that is an afterthought for many businesses is outcomes. Now, this isn't just your outcome. You might have the outcome of I want to retire someday. This is your customer's outcome. This is that customer experience. And I'm going to tell you, if you think customer experience ends when they get their product delivered, you're about ready to go down in flames because it does not. Maybe when the pickings are easy and sales are easy and customers don't have a lot of choices, maybe, just maybe, they're a little bit more tolerant of your lack of follow-up through the process. We both are very focused on different aspects of this equation. If you want this to improve, you hire more sales, marketing, you get better leads, you find better sources of your products, you reduce the cost of labor, or you reduce the cost of goods. You do lots of things to improve this. Where Andrew has a significant focus is right here. How do I improve that customer experience in order to have my customer make a better outcome? Why?
And let me just interject there, because
yes,
one of the things I always say is the strength of every business is not in the new business it generates on the input side. It's in the repeat business and referrals it gets. Yet every company spends money on strategy, systems, process, tools to support those processes and systems, all on new business, but they don't spend any money on those things for referrals and repeat business. And the single greatest thing that any company can do to increase those referrals and repeat business, geometrically so, is through customer experience, which is
Absolutely.
Outcomes. Customer service is reactive. It's how I'm going to reactively solve problems along the way in delivering on the promise I made you. Customer experience is completely different. It's proactive. Absolutely. It's how you want to design and implement how you want your customers to feel as you're providing them that service to create a remarkable experience. So the outcome is so much better than just the transactional agreement.
Absolutely. So if you think about that, right, if you can, I mean, if your cost of acquisition of a customer, I don't know what it is. I mean, many companies, it's a lot of money. It'd be $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 to acquire a B2B customer. Well, if I get a repeat customer that comes back over and over and over, that customer is more profitable. I'm literally getting more profit on my bottom line by bringing them back in. So the outcomes really come into three different areas. You, right? You're playing for you to win the game. If you own the business, you're trying to make profit. And that might be a focus that runs through the whole entire organization because you're trying to make profit. But the other outcomes that are really important is your customer, because your customer is the one that's going to come back in through, or maybe refer you or do those other things. And then finally, what's the outcomes for your employees? And I think this is something in the last year or so we've talked a lot about, is how do we make sure that our employees are satisfied? How do we make sure that they don't feel that their work is mundane or unappreciated? And a lot of that candidly comes back to the throughput piece of the business. That's the work after the sales guy sells it and the shipping guy ships it. What happens in the creamy center of the Oreo cookie here? And that is the one area in business I can tell you. I mean, there's two, throughput and outcomes, where CEOs don't have a really good handle on their business, but I can speak to the throughputs and I'll let you speak to the outcomes. On the throughput piece, I ask really simple questions. I've sat down with hundreds of CEOs over the years, and they all feel like they know their numbers. And I'll ask them things like, what's your customer acquisition cost? Oh, $49.36. And we're trending down by 3% versus last quarter. I'm like, that's great. I'm like, what's your bottom line margin? I'm at 8.2%, EBITDA, and that's up from 7.6. They're throwing out the numbers and it's great. And then I say, wonderful. Tell me how many seconds it takes to manufacture your product. Well, I don't know. What? Seconds? What are you talking about? Seconds take. We have people down on the floor that take care of that. Yeah, but how many seconds does it take to manufacture each product? How many minutes does it take to pack and ship your products? How many hours per day do your people spend searching your warehouse or your database or your code repository looking for information? How many hours a day do they do that? I don't really know, right? So the problem is that most of us don't know how the sausage is made. We know we slaughter the pigs and we put them in the fronts. We know we ship the customers, we ship the sausage out the door, but nobody has any idea how many times you got to turn the grinder to get those things done. And that's really important because we expect these people to do that. And many times we don't have a really good process at all. We just throw people into this, into this sort of mix. And we hope and expect that they'll figure out some way to take the order and get it to the shipping department. Now, I'm talking manufacturing and shipping and distribution right now. Same thing happens with software. Same things happens with service companies. From the time the customer books with you until the time that we complete the job and invoice it, how much time does that take? How many minutes does it take to write an invoice?
I think we could talk about this for many episodes.
We should wrap it and do it again.
And we will, different aspects of it for those that are following. What I'd like to do in ending the show, though, is maybe you could offer them a tip, a gold nugget, something that's universal that they could do on their own on the throughput side, and I could do on the outcome side.
Well, I think the first thing that you have to do when it comes to process is you have to identify what your core processes are. And really, I like the number 6. I think many companies say they have 3 to 10. 6 to me is the right number. 6 core processes are really important. Let me see if I can just move this to a blank page here. So let me just go back here and start over. So your 6 core processes are what we're looking for that comprise about 80% of the outcome for your company. But also, if you can apply the 80-20 rule to just about anything, we also could apply to these 6, the 80-20 rule, and say, look, there's going to be like one of these that's going to make the majority of that impact. Hey, I mean, there's going to be 1 or 2 things that are really going to make the majority of the impact. That could be things like, I've worked with companies where their accounting process is really messed up and it takes them a really long time to get paid. Okay, well, if you got paid faster, would it improve all of these things? Yes, it would. We wouldn't have to struggle for payroll. We could pay more money. We could do all these kind of things. So identifying what those 6 are, writing those down, and then applying the Pareto principle against it and saying, do these 6, does that equal 80% of the outcome? Or is
it outcome or output? Is it 80%?
It's really outputs in that regard.
I think it's output. It's not outcome.
Yeah, it's not outcome because, to your point, outcome consulting is really different from what we do. We're helping you try to get better outputs.
No, it's output.
We're helping to try
to. You're talking about. I would.
Yeah. So if the throughput's better, I did write. Look at that. See, I even wrote it. That's why you caught me. I don't know what happened to my, I'm just going to do that. How about that? That makes it even better.
That works.
So the 80-20, identify what those 6 core processes are. And then I think it's just observation at that point. You can try to create a process map of those yourself. But again, going back to our earlier conversation, it's way better to have somebody else look at that. And that might be, you might even identify each and every step in that process, but have other people look at it. Have your CFO look at it. Have a friend look at it that's a process consultant. Jump on one of the webinars we're going to start and have one of my tech team look at it, because you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of times people get stuck in these loops where they're just doing things to do them and they're not really providing any value. And then I think the main thing there is just try to figure out how to automate that. Why don't you talk a little bit about outcome?
Again, customer experience output is how you want your customers to feel rather than just delivering the service based on the scope of services or the transaction or the product or whatever it is. And one tip I like to give people they can do on their own is, if you ever thought about, you always want to make everybody who has an interaction with the customer, whether it's before a customer and every step along the journey, ask them different questions. Just like Derrick is asking different questions to them on throughput, I would do the same thing. Have you ever asked your customers what they really, really, besides work and what they're doing and their family and friends, what do you really, really care about? What makes you excited outside of family, friends, and work? And you'd be shocked how many people would tell you. And if you listen and you dig deep, now you have an ability to follow up with them in a way that has great meaning to them. If they're really into sailing and you happen to sail and you can talk about that, and then you send them a magazine subscription to Sailing Magazine, I mean, it's so easy to touch people. Walt Disney had a saying on his wall above his desk, and it was something he lived by, and it was, make people feel big. And that is how he built his company. That is how he built the perception and the followers and the experience that he wanted to provide. He wanted to make people feel big. So I would say the same thing. Now, there's many other tips and tools I'll give you.
Sure.
But this is something. Now, the hard part is, how do we deploy that geometrically and culturally in the organization and change the behavior of the people to do that, and then take that feedback and communicate to the team the information that you're getting so that collectively you can make a larger impact. So
let's talk about that next time. Yeah, because I got some ideas too. I've done some things on the throughput piece where we try to personalize the experience for customers, even though we're talking about trying to get a repeatable result and maintain a standard deviation and all those kind of things. But you can bake that into the throughput. One that I did years ago was every time that we shipped a product, we took a Polaroid of ourselves making that product and we dropped it in the box with just a little note. to the customer. Hey, just wanted to say, hey, thanks for doing this. And our eventual plan was, we never really got around to it, but our eventual plan was for them to put their name and then have a website where you could go and find out more about that person. Well, that really connects you to the product.
I mean,
right?
and that's a beautiful thing. I mean, and
what is it called? What does a Polaroid picture cost? 15 cents?
Right? And that reminds me of another
cool
tip
thing, right?
Well, I mean, here's another quick tip, and I'm going to equate it to dating and marriage.
Yeah.
But it's just like business. So your salespeople, they're courting this customer for new business, right? Just like you may court someone in a romantic fashion. Well, imagine you've courted this person, you've dated for 2 years, and now you're standing at the altar, but somebody else is walking down the aisle. That effectively is most every sales organization, where once the sale is made, the salesperson is out, and now they're interfacing with this whole team that they don't even know anybody, and they don't know what that journey is going to be like. Well, imagine if you created a video, and that video was shared with either the brand new customer or just before they became a customer. And it introduced every team member they were going to interact with. And that team member introduces themselves personally by saying, hey, I'm Andrew. I'm like really into pickleball. I do pickleball every day. I'm obsessed with it. I play in tournaments. I even teach people. And oh, by the way, my role here is this, and this is how I'm going to make a difference for you in that journey. And then the next person, and then the next person.
Love that. I love that.
And no, but almost every person that signs up with a company is now going to be like, I don't know what's next. I don't know who I'm dealing with, So that makes an enormous difference in the experience that a customer will have, which at the end of the day, really, I mean, the strength of your business is in the referrals and repeat business. So
it sure is. All right, this has been so good, and let's continue this conversation for next week. But remember, folks, we're talking about inputs, throughputs, outcomes, or outputs and outcomes, and these are the 4 elements that exist in every single business. And those are the only things you really do as a business. You either add, you create, you ship, or you deliver a product, and then there's the customer experience.
And then
afterwards.
you enhance
that, right? So we're going to keep talking about that over the next couple of weeks. This was fun. Thank you all for joining us here on The Sauce.
Baby.
The Sauce. And we got the rap, so we're going to play the rap right now. So you're set with the with our new theme music. Okay, guys, until next time. Thank you.
The sauce is the key, we whipping it up. The sauce is the key, we cooking it up. The sauce is the key, we cooking it up.